Please take a seat. Please take your seats. This is not a full room, so please move forward. Tayo-tayo lang naman po. As only. That's how you translate it. Ha? Oh. Yes. So we can start na, no? We're live on Facebook and YouTube. Yes, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Good morning, everyone. We understand that the weather condition is quite dire, with particular areas submerged in floodwaters. So before we start, we hope that everyone is safe. I hope my family is also safe back home. We are going to proceed with this morning's program. To those in the room who braved the rains and floods, thank you for joining us today. And to those who are watching the live stream of this event and who are participating via Zoom, thank you as well, and please help us spread the word about the live stream. I'm John Reina Antequera, Senior Program Officer for Outreach and Communication at the Asian Network for Free Elections, or ANFREL, and I will be moderating this morning's event. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the presence and support of COMELEC Commissioner Celis. He is the commissioner in charge for Task Force Katotohanan, Katapatan, Katarungan sa Halalan. He's also the commissioner in charge. Hello. He is also the commissioner in charge for digital transformation, QMS, IT, and cybersecurity. Also the commissioner in charge for the Committee on Gender and Youth. Next is Director Abigail Claire F. Carbero Llacuña, Director 3 of EID, Head of Standards and Innovation Office at COMELEC. She's also part of the Task Force KKK sa Halalan Core Group. Attorney Maria Lourdes Fugoso Alcain, our Chief of Staff from the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis, also part of the core group of the Task Force KKK. John Carlos Cuadra, Executive Assistant 4, from the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis, also part of the core group of the Task Force KKK. Mr. Paulo Aldaba, Executive Assistant 5, from the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis. Ms. Soleil Reyes, from the Office of Commissioner Noli Pipo. Attorney Melissa Gloton, from the Office of Commissioner Noli Pipo. Office of Commissioner Tangaro Kasingal, Attorney Hazel Boktayon Tayaban. And also, we would like to acknowledge the presence and support of ACT Teachers Party List Representative Antonio Tino. Today marks the culmination of the International Election Observation Mission of ANFREL to the 2025 national and local elections in the Philippines, as we launch the final election observation report of ANFREL. On May 12, 2025, with a record turnout of 82.2%, 57.35 million out of 68.43 million registered voters exercised their right to vote, which demonstrated the Filipino people's commitment to elections and democracy. Today, we'll hear from my colleagues at ANFREL the insights about the collective observation of ANFREL international observers who were deployed across the country during the 2025 elections. Drawing from these observations, we'll offer a set of recommendations on areas of concern to improve on. ANFREL also invited key electoral stakeholders, including the Commission on Elections, policymakers, and our partners and colleagues from civil society organizations to reflect on the 2025 Philippine elections in a reaction panel. Then we'll open the floor for questions from our esteemed guests and members of the media who are covering today's event. So without further ado, to formally open ANFREL's final report launch, please welcome ANFREL Secretary General, Ms. Corazon Ignacio.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Good morning. Brave people in Metro Manila. The decision whether to proceed with this forum or do face-to-face or do hybrid has been challenging. Until late afternoon, Brisa and her team we're trying to determine the mood and the presence, availability of people. And we are glad you're all here. Today, we close the election observation mission of, of the Asian Network for Free Elections in the 2025 election. Our tradition at ANFREL is to get the to secure the accreditation of the election management body, to meet and engage the stakeholders, to do pre-election, election day, and post-election day observation, and finally, write and complete the report and present it to the stakeholders of the country's election. And today, that is the culminating activity. And from here, ANFREL will move on to other engagements, both election monitoring and other advocacy engagements. The significance of the finding of the Asian Network in the recently concluded election is contained in the title itself of the report. You all have a copy of the report. It says, high turnout, low competition, resilient participation in a constrained electoral landscape. And that exactly, dear brave audience, is the, how do you call it? The highlight of the recent election. We had high turnout, 82%, and John says it speaks of the high degree of commitment of the Filipinos to the electoral process. It may be that, or it may be because of other factors, like we simply like fiestas, or there might be a high engagement or high commitment to political parties and candidates, or because of commitment in the commercial transaction involved in elections, meaning vote buying. So the report will more or less give you a glimpse of what are the considerations in the high turnout. It is very positive. We are very happy if it is a commitment to the electoral process. But if it is because of some other reasons, then it does not augur well for the Philippine democracy. And the other key word here is resilient participation, meaning to say the participation here refers to the various stakeholders in the process. It might be the political parties, the candidates, the voters themselves, the election management body, COMELEC. Everyone has shown resilience. May 12 was a hit in the center of the heat wave in the Philippines, and that we went to the polls, and 82% of the voters is really something about speaks something of the commitment of the resilience of the Filipinos, and the constrained electoral landscape should tell us something about the background surrounding the Philippine elections. Our election is very exciting, to say the least, because there are so many unexpected, what do you call this, events and results. As a matter of fact, the result itself has been very surprising. And analysts are saying because it is of the profile of the new voters that affected the result of the, at least in the national level. Okay, so the report, which our analysts will present later on, will describe the constraints in the Philippine electoral landscape. So hang on, And you will hear more about this. What is the constrained electoral landscape? In the course of our observation, ANFREL is present in 18 countries and has 27 member organizations. So we have been to almost every election, excepting for elections where we ourselves withhold our participation because of some issues. Like from the start, we know that the election will not be democratic, and so it is not worth it to enter into to observe the election. So in almost all the elections that we have observed, there are certain truisms in international election observation. One is elections are a living organism. It's always fluid, it is expanding, it is growing, it is changing. The election in 2025 is a lot different than the election in 2022. The factors, the actors are different. So the observations are also different. Number two, truism, and the challenges are different. But it is the commitment of the players to the process. For example, ANFREL is committed to observing the election objectively, applying international standards. The election management body, COMELEC, the election management body has exhibited progress and changes towards achieving transparency and inclusivity in the election. The ATM system, the AES system, the automated election system, has been changed. So there were a lot of new factors in the 2025 election, very different. And so that goes through, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of country. From country to country, we observe different, what do you call this? We find there are so many different findings that makes election observation interesting. Another tourism in election observation is every election is unique. The Philippine election is very interesting and challenging for the observers because it is the only country, at least in this part of the world, excepting India, which has an automated system, and of course Japan and Korea, but on a limited scale. Ours is the most extensive usage of the AES. So it is very challenging, even if it has been used since 2010. And to this day, you know, of course, that there are still skeptics about the process. So the report will more or less deal with the perceived integrity of the process. And lastly, the third truism is that no one can do it alone. Always, there is a need for partnership and collaboration in every undertaking. So what you will hear later is a collaboration not only of ANFREL, within ANFREL, but also with its partner organizations in the Philippines, specifically LENTE, PPCRV, and NAMFREL. Lastly, I'd like to thank our partners in the mission, to the UK, International Development, the champions of participation, progress, and prosperity. Thank you for your support. The Carter Center people for lending us and collaborating with us on mining the digital technology and how it influences the process and the result of the election. Thank you very much. And of course, to the member organizations of ANFREL and to the 21 volunteers, young volunteers coming from how many countries were represented in the last 14 we had 21 observers coming from 14 countries, which observed. In the same way that they contributed to the findings and to the observation, I'm sure they took away learnings they could not have gotten anywhere else. So with that in mind, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Cora. I agree, no? Partnership and collaboration. This report really reflects that it is a collaboration between different organizations. So, we move to the next part of the program, which is the presentation of the mission overview, key findings, and recommendations. To provide that, may I invite to the stage Ms. Briza Rosales, the Executive Director of ANFREL. Dr. Manjesh Rana, the Senior Program Officer for International Election Observation Mission of ANFREL. And talking about partnership and collaboration, ANFREL piloted a social media monitoring initiative for the Philippine mission in partnership, of course, with the Carter Center. May I also invite Ms. Olivia Liu, data analyst at the Carter Center. The floor and the mic is yours.
Good morning, everyone. We are so fortunate to be on this side of the mission, and thank you so much for being here despite like all the uncertainties. And Shannon, will you help me managing the slides? Thank you. So the plan is that three of us are going to take you through the report. I'll basically take you through the overview and the key focus areas and methodology. Then Briza will be discussing the thematic recommendations that we have in the report. And then our friends and colleagues from the Carter Center will take us through social media findings. Right? So I'll start with the overview of the mission. Just a quick recap before I discuss the findings of the report. So as you are already aware of, we had this event where we shared the interim findings or the interim reports immediately after the elections. And we would again like to congratulate Filipino stakeholders for their mass participation in elections. And I think Ma'am Cora has already highlighted, especially the name that we chose for the report, which rightly sums up, the resilience, participation, and, the kind of inclusiveness that this election has shown. So next slide, please. Yeah. So little bit about ANFREL. Again, this is also something that Ma'am Cora has already covered, but maybe I'll just be quick about it. The ANFREL, which stands for Asia Network for Free Elections, it was established in 1997. So it has nearly been around 30 years, 28 years. It promotes democratic elections in Asia through election observation, capacity building, and advocacy efforts. We have a network that's spread across 18 countries, and we have around 28 member organizations. It also supports civil society, media, stakeholders in addressing electoral challenges and advancing democratization. And so far, it has conducted over 84 international election observation missions. You can see on the screen this is where our members are spread across Asia. So we have like around 28 member organizations spread across 18 countries. And just to highlight some of our members and partners or regional collaborations that we have 3 amazing members in Philippines. And compared to the other countries, I would also want to highlight that, Philippines have the most vibrant and most active CSO network. So this is something which is quite positive, and we also saw that during the election time. So we have Lente, NAMFREL, and PPCRV. So moving on, I'll now come to the overview of the mission. So it's important to highlight that ANFREL built on this important mission on the long-standing commitment and prior experience that comes from our earlier missions in 2010, 2016, and 2022. You can see the reports on the screen. This is the most recent report, 2025, and this is the 2022 and 2010 reports. So, looking at the scope of the mission, again, it was a comprehensive mission which covered different stages, including the campaign period, the election day, and the post-election developments. And throughout this cycle, we focused on integrity, inclusivity, and technology. And some of the key focus areas included campaign monitoring, which involves assessing candidates' activities, both on and off social media, because we are aware that lots of campaign activities are taking place on social media now. That's the reason we have this important partnership with the Carter Center, because we can't really ignore this part. In fact, this is a pattern which we have observed in the other Asian countries or the other countries around the globe now, that a lot actually happens on the social media. So we monitored the campaign period. We assessed candidates' activities. We wanted to see whether all the candidates and the political parties enjoy equal space, right? And whether it was a level playing field for all the actors. Another key aspect was electoral integrity. We wanted to evaluate transparency, so that's what we did. We also monitored whether they have properly complied to all the legal norms that we have at place governing the elections, the process of transmitting precinct results, post-election audits, and the collation and announcements of results by citizens, armed organizations, and the media. Another important aspect was inclusivity and participation. So ANFREL also monitored participation of vulnerable groups, that includes persons with disabilities, senior citizens, persons deprived of liberty or detainees, and also the indigenous peoples. Then another key aspect was some of these areas which ANFREL has been continuously observing, and this is something which is a concern not just in Philippines but across Asia. So through its observation exercise, we also documented abuses like vote buying, vote selling, abuse and misuse of resources, electoral violence, and disinformation. And then another innovative or another new thing to add to this particular electoral cycle was also technology. So we also monitored technology and credibility, and the mission closely monitored especially the deployment and the functionality of ACMs, that is automated counting machines. And then of course the election day and beyond. So on the election day, we had again a team of 21 observers who were spread across Philippines. And we observed and monitored the opening part, the voting procedure throughout the day, the closing part, the result transmission, and later on the post-election processes as well. So looking at some of the important numbers. So we had 21 election observers, the international observers, and Ma'am Gora have already highlighted that they represent around 14 nations. So you can imagine how diverse the group was. So we had 21 international observers, and they were deployed across 11 regions and 21 provinces across Philippines. Looking at the election day stats, in these 11 regions, we managed to cover 270 polling stations. That included 238 polling stations situated at school premises, 15 polling precincts situated in shopping malls. Again, that is something which was also a highlight of Philippines. Personally, for me also, I think this was the first time I observed mall voting. And again, it's like, taking like kind of using the private stakeholders also, in this important exercise. I'm still wondering how this partnership work, but I think it's very innovative. And then we also observed 17 other polling precincts situated in places like gymnasium or detention centers and city halls. And further bifurcating these 270 polling stations, we had 75 precincts located in NCR itself and 195 spread across the rest of the country. So this is the International Election Observation Mission team. They all look very fresh, very happy, because this was before the deployment. I think after this long 3 weeks deployment, they all looked very tired. But again, they came up with really good qualitative and quantitative data. So moving on, let's talk about methodology as well. We used both qualitative and quantitative tools, so it was a combined method for comprehensive assessment. We also made good use of structured, in-depth stakeholder interviews as a tool. So we engaged officials, experts, candidates, CSOs, and voters, and the questions revolved around the fairness, preparedness, inclusivity, among the other important factors. Another important tool that ANFREL used was small and focus group discussions, SGDs and FGDs. We consulted vulnerable and marginal groups across Philippines. This includes persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and senior citizens, and we discussed their perceptions and their participation, and we also tried to understand the barriers that they faced and the reforms that are needed to improve their valued participation. Looking at the tools, we made use of Kobo toolbox. This enabled ANFREL the real-time reporting during pre-election, election day, and post-election phase. I'll also take you through some of our forms later. And another important monitoring area was, of course, social media. So with the Carter Center, we analyzed more than 60,000 posts across 5 platforms. We identified trends in disinformation, civic education, and regulatory compliance. But I leave this part for our colleagues from the Carter Center. I won't go deeper into this. So let me also take you through some of the glimpse from the interviews. So these are ANFREL observers, and these are the FGDs conducted with the first-time voters, persons with disabilities, and with the youth to understand their issues, concerns, and participation. Moving further, we will also take you through the Kobo toolbox. So we had around 6 forms. The first form was divided into 2 parts: the pre-election observation overall, like the general form, and the pre-election observation, which specifically focused on abuse of state resources and the campaign finance laws. Then we had another form, especially for the voting day, which included questions about the opening part, voting part throughout the day, and the closing processes checklists. Then we had a Form C for the post-election development, post-election day narrative reports. Throughout the campaign period or the election day or the post-election, the observers could also make use of the incident report form when they witness any particular incident that they want to record. And then we also had this interview log. So whenever they interviewed the stakeholders, they could always use this particular form to fill in all the information. And then there was a back-end team consisting of 2 analysts, which analyzed the qualitative and quantitative data that we received from the field. And these are like some of the examples of the forms as well. We had questions like about socio-political context or campaign environment, media coverage, civil society, domestic, international election observers, and so on. So we tried to make it in alignment with the research objectives, the key focus areas that we shared initially. Moving on to the standards of observation. So throughout this process of observation, ANFREL's observers adhere to international standards, like always. This includes the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation, the Declaration of Global Principles for Non-Partisan Election Observation, the model commitments for advancing genuine and credible elections, and of course, ANFREL's own code of conduct, ensuring impartiality, objectivity, and transparency throughout their missions. So that's all from my side. I'll now pass it on to Breeza, Executive Director of ANFREL, and she will take you through the core thematic recommendations. Thank you so much.
You can continue if you want. Okay, thank you, Rana. Thank you for sharing with everyone our methodology. It is our way of presenting that the mission was conducted systematically. And at the same time, when I discuss the recommendation, I will also pinpoint the findings. These are the select findings picked to highlight those short-term and long-term recommendations. For this part, I will be highlighting the two-part reform roadmap. So, as highlighted during May 16, when we had our initial briefing, when we highlighted the findings, we mentioned that the 2025 elections, these midterm elections, was demonstrated both the resilience of Filipino voters and the continuing need for electoral reform. Of course, on Monday, we all know what will happen on Monday, so it's the State of the Nation address, and it's the opening of the 20th Congress as well. So we see that as an opportunity to institutionalize the gains, to address the systemic challenges, and build a more inclusive, competitive, and accountable electoral system. Of course, this mission, it carries the responsibility to respond to long-standing gaps in governance and build upon the opportunities presented by the 2025 elections. Of course, these recommendations as well, the very purpose of presenting this is to amplify also the reform agenda of our ANFREL members and the different civil society organizations who monitored the elections and who are continuing to push for meaningful change. And all of these recommendations, as highlighted by Rana, they are firmly rooted in globally recognized frameworks such as the model commitments and the global network for securing electoral integrity. So let me start with the short-term actions. Those are non-legislative that can easily be implemented and addressed by the COMELEC. And yes, I would just want to recognize again the Office of Commissioner Celis and the different departments of COMELEC. Yes, maraming salamat po sa pagpunta kahit po suspended ang work today. Salamat po sa pagbibigay ng oras for this launch. So for the immediate actions to sustain the momentum, we have highlighted during the initial briefing three, of course, issues that we want to address today. Of course, apart from that, we have also highlighted that the elections, we saw the elections through the lens of our international observers, an enhanced transparency, sustained efforts toward inclusivity, and high voter participation. But however, the mission also identified areas requiring improvement. And just like what the title of the book has already been telling us, there was limited electoral competition, the persistent challenges such as abuse of state resources in elections, vote buying, vote selling, and campaign finance issues, and the operational and management issues on election day, and issues related to safeguarding information integrity. Yeah, next slide. So as to election administration, talking to a lot of stakeholders, as we have mentioned one by one who are the stakeholders that we talked with. The Commission was widely perceived by election stakeholders as more accessible and communicative than in the past cycle. So this is an area of improvement that ANFREL highlighted in 2022 and is a welcome change for many stakeholders interviewed. And building on the lessons from previous cycles, next slide. COMELEC introduced a series of administrative and procedural reforms aimed, of course, at improving the credibility and efficiency of the electoral process. While stakeholders acknowledged these initiatives, ANFREL observers also noted persistent capacity constraints, especially at the local level, which at times it limited the Commission's ability to uniformly implement and enforce regulations. So despite these promising developments, implementation across polling centers or voting centers, but we saw on election day remained uneven. So observations during election day revealed disparities caused by logistical limitations, somehow inconsistent communication strategies, and varying levels of preparedness and training among electoral board members. So with that finding, we have highlighted here some of the recommendations that we want to address to COMELEC. You can go back to that. To conduct structured reviews and enforce queue systems, especially for priority voters, because we've seen during election day, especially to those large voting centers with bigger number of voters, we've seen the long queues and the different levels of implementation of the priority polling place. So crowd management should be addressed, especially with large number of voters. Second is to enhance voting accessibility. Rana has also already highlighted the use of malls as voting center, and we've seen that as an effective mechanism to improve accessibility. And we are hoping that COMELEC should consider expanding that mall voting. We are seeing also mall voting in Thailand. They are using big malls, especially on advanced voting day. So in advanced voting day, everyone is voting in the malls. So we are also lucky observing the elections because we are observing this in the big and grand malls in Thailand. So that's something that as a good and as one of the best practices that we've seen during the past years of observing the elections. The last time that we saw that was during the 2023 elections in Thailand. So hopefully COMELEC could consider expanding it more, finding more appropriate malls, especially in the urban areas. And of course, the audit of polling station, although it's an infrastructural problem, hopefully COMELEC could consider or study more about expanding the list also and not to conduct the voting only in public schools. So mall voting is one, but hopefully could consider more areas where voting can be conducted. And at the same time, the voter information sheet distribution. So it's something that we also saw for this 2025 election. We did not particularly saw this during the past years or 2022, 2016, but this time we saw this where COMELEC implemented the distribution again. But we are hoping to study more if this is still needed, if this is still effective, receiving the voter information sheet. Third, conduct of a full nationwide and more realistic mock election exercises to test the functionality of the automated counting machines, including the transmission process, because the very purpose of the mock elections is to see if there will be technical, operational problem, and how to improve the voter experience. So it's something that hopefully, because looking at the calendar also for the Barm parliamentary elections, there will be a mock elections this Saturday in Marawi and Tawi-Tawi. Maximize the transparency features of the automated counting machine. Of course, one of the very reasons why we use also the automated counting machine is to enhance the transparency. Hopefully, by the next election cycle, we will be seeing the use of the verification using the automated counting machine and how to use properly the receipt, the QR code in the receipt, wherein the electoral board member can verify the vote of the voter. And then lastly, to be more transparent, although we mentioned that there was an enhanced transparency across all its activities, but hopefully it will expand to publication of decisions on electoral cases. Particularly for international observers, we were keen and happy to see some updates about the show cause orders, but we were also following the post-election developments. So hopefully we can see what are the updates on these cases, the disclosure of campaign finance reports, the detailed election results to make it more timely, and comprehensive documentation of all the testing and certification processes related to the use of election and technology. Yeah. Next. Yeah. So there was a particular focus also, especially that this is the second implementation of the Committee on Contrabigay. So part of our mission is to document also the different presumptions, if we can see one. So during the course of our observation, we have documented, actually coming from the reports, ANFREL observed on instances of vote buying through cash and goods and cases of abuse of state resources by incumbent candidates. As we highlighted in the report, there were in the 40% of cities observed, ANFREL observers witnessed government vehicles or buildings being used for campaign activities, and voters in 69% of observed cities reported experiencing or witnessing vote-buying attempts firsthand. So at least these are the top two. I think we have highlighted at least 5 instances that the international observers saw during the course of the observation. And with that, of course, we appreciate the aggressive implementation of the committee, but we also want to highlight to publish more the updates and decisions on the show cause orders and cases, and to enhance the presumption based on the 2025 election experience. Second, to sustain the campaigns about abuse of state resources and its legal consequences, and to strengthen oversight coordination among government agencies. Last, for short term, is safeguarding information integrity. Although Olivia and Dan will be discussing this more, but we just want to highlight also, of course, the effort of the Commission in establishing Task Force KKK. And with that, because Commissioner Celis is here, hopefully they would institutionalize their own social media monitoring unit as amplified by civil society organization, and to strengthen the engagement with platforms and civil society organization, and to promote more transparency approaches, because as we all know, Congress has been addressing the problem of disinformation for the past 3 years, and they are discussing about a lot of solutions on how to combat this, but hopefully the Congress and COMELEC would lean on promoting more transparency approaches over censorship. And for the long-term reforms for systemic change, of course, these reforms require congressional action, and thank you very much for coming, Rep. Tino. Of course, this is for you. And for all, actually, some offices coming from the different senators also confirmed. I think they're here, and some are online. Of course, these recommendations are for the Congress. So, yeah, next. Of course. For redefining the definition of candidate, and to allow COMELEC to regulate pre-campaign activities, curbing premature campaigning and early vote buying. Second, of course, under the Omnibus Election Code, to address and to review and update the OEC to align with the 1987 Constitution, and not only in the Constitution, but also in the current legal framework. But we would like to highlight 3. One, this is surprising for me personally, because talking to international observers, they have also highlighted, and they also posed the question why COMELEC offices, cities, municipalities, and provincial can be found in the city halls and provincial capital. So they're asking about the issue on independence and integrity. So when explaining to them, because it was limited by Section 55 of Omnibus Election Code, and of course, we would want to highlight this, that hopefully Congress would address this problem by amending this section Second is to update definition on electoral offenses and enforcement procedures more on alignment with the legal framework right now, and incorporate provisions, although there's already the revised automated law, but we would want to see more enhancement on digital security and online campaign regulation. Next. Yeah. To amplify also the recommendations of our civil society organization, but we have been monitoring, of course, the campaign finance. Hopefully, there will be an appetite to address these issues, to institutionalize both these offices in the COMELEC, especially the Political Finance Affairs Department, or as we are calling it, Campaign Finance Office, and the Vulnerable Sectors Office. Next. All right. To ban political dynasties and to align it with the current legislation right now, apart from the SK Reform Law and the Bangsamoro Electoral Code, of course, there are ongoing talks and study about enacting an enabling legislation to enforce this constitutional ban with clear definitions and enforcement mechanisms to curb dynastic control, to reform the party list to address the same problem, especially protecting the system from political capture by the traditional elites, to uphold authentic sectoral representation, and to ensure transparent accreditation to disclose, of course, qualification criteria and to disqualify dynastic or co-opted groups. Next slide. In advancing electoral system innovation, because reviewing the different bills from the past 3 years, 6 years when we monitored the elections during 2022 election. So we want to highlight to enable advanced voting, pass legislation to allow early voting for vulnerable groups and essential workers, to improve access and ease election day crowding. Second is to improve voting efficiency, to study more on how to lower the voter-to-machine ratio by deploying more automated counting machines, and to assess the precinct clustering, because we've seen that particularly on election day. And to boost polling staff capacity, because as we have highlighted, there are different layers and the implementation varies depending on the level of preparedness of the electoral board members. So yeah, so I think that's my last slide, and we can talk more about the recommendations when we have our question and answer and open discussion. So thank you very much. I would like to pass on the microphone to Olivia to particularly discuss the social media monitoring effort and initiative on how ANFREL and the Carter Center has or did a parallel monitoring in line with the implementation of the COMELEC resolution. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Briza. I'd like to invite up my colleague Dan Richardson to co-present with me. I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with ANFREL on this, and to both of us visit the Philippines for the first time and present and present our findings on this exercise. So I'll pass it off to Dan to start us off.
Thanks, Olivia, and hello, everyone. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging a great job that ANFREL did. It's impressive to see all the different recommendations and all the work that went into your observations, so congratulations. Then I also wanted to start by introducing what the Carter Center is. The Carter Center is a nonprofit founded by President Carter and Mrs. Carter in 1982. We work on both health and peace activities, but obviously we are here on behalf of the peace programs, where we specifically work in the democracy program. We have monitored over 135 elections in 40 countries, but we specifically today are representing the Digital Threats to Democracy initiative that works around election integrity and information integrity. So we've been working since 2018, and we've monitored social media in over 15 countries in different capacities. The democracy program has also worked in the Philippines before, in 2010, 2016, and 2022 most recently. We were really excited to collaborate with ANFREL in this exercise. ANFREL has the local knowledge, the election knowledge, and we could bring the technical skills to implement a social media monitoring exercise. But as we can move to the next slide, we can get started by saying that this was a very limited exercise for ANFREL and TCC. As Breeza mentioned, we monitored social media in accordance with the COMELEC Resolution 11064, where we had an approved party or URL list of 66 Senate candidates and then 146 party lists out of the 158, as those are the ones that we could identify. And from there, we monitored their social media discourse in accordance with the resolution. But we also then looked at the different type of discourse online in general on those lists. You know, the public policy themes, was there calls to political action, whether to vote, whether to register to, you know, campaign on behalf of a candidate. But we also then looked at, you know, a variety of other issues that would be, we might call undemocratic speech that may be calls to violence, hate speech, mis or disinformation that may undermine the electoral integrity of the process and people's faith in the process. And so we did this by monitoring those accounts across 5 different platforms, as mentioned, Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We collected 60,000 posts from the period of, I believe it was February 9th through May 24th. And so we got 60,000 posts from that, from those accounts, and then we coded 10% because of just bandwidth issues and the nature of the tight timeline. I'll let Livia explain in detail how that 10% sample was drawn. But overall, we coded this in Junkipedia across the 90 different items. As I mentioned a little earlier, democratic, undemocratic policy, you know, even how the EMB was represented in the social media posts. And overall, I just want to say that the speech was overwhelmingly democratic. That the conversation online was about information sharing, endorsements, campaign, oh, pardon me, thank you. There were no sightings of election irregularities on a broad scale, and if there were complaints, they were of minimal impact in the larger ecosystem. So, and we also want to note that there was no coordinated inauthentic behavior in these accounts monitored in this exercise. But now I will turn it over to our data analyst extraordinaire, Olivia, to dive into the data in depth. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks, Dan. If we can progress to the next slide. Perfect. So this just gives an overview of the different accounts that we monitored. As Dan mentioned, we looked at the list of registered online campaign platforms submitted to the COMELEC per Resolution 11064. We're able to monitor 66 senatorial candidates, 148 party lists, and that was across 5 platforms. So in total, we monitored 294 distinct social media accounts, collecting over 60,000 posts from those accounts over the timeline that Dan mentioned, and coding roughly a 10% sample of them. If we can progress to the next slide. This just kind of gives an overview of the number of posts that we both cataloged, took into our system from these accounts, and the number of posts that we coded over time. That 10% randomized sample, we made sure that we were coding 10% of the posts coming in each week, so that we made sure we covered the entire campaign period kind of similarly. And you'll note from these graphs that we see kind of the trend curve of coded posts very closely models the trend curve of cataloged posts. And I will just highlight that we coded more than a 10% threshold of the posts in the week leading up to the election. As you can see from the graph on the left, there was a huge surge in content online in that week. And we're also aware that that is one of the most crucial weeks for influencing kind of voter perceptions in the lead up to the election. So if we progress on. And as Dan mentioned, Democratic content outpaced undemocratic content for the entire observation period. And we saw that overall, Democratic content made up 71% of our coded corpus. We can progress. So the first kind of feature of that Democratic content was campaigning processes and electoral processes. we saw that an overwhelming number of posts contained endorsements, party lists endorsing candidates, candidates endorsing other candidates. That was 31% of our coded posts contained an endorsement of some kind. We also saw 26% of our coded posts recapped campaign events. We saw that kind of recaps of those events took place at much higher rates than kind of announcements of future campaign events, which is noteworthy. If we progress on, this is an example of some of those posts that I just mentioned. On the left, we see an example X post containing an endorsement or discussing an endorsement, and on the right, we see a recap by a party list of a past campaign event. We also looked at a number of different key public policy themes within the posts that we cataloged and coded. We saw that kind of the three most salient public policy themes during the campaign period were the economy, public service provision, and human rights. And overall, 33% of the coded posts discussed at least one key public policy theme. So we saw that candidates and party lists were really engaging in kind of substantive policy discussions. Here's an example of a post discussing the economy. We can progress on. We also look for, when we code social media posts, we look for kind of proactive information sharing, kind of this active sharing of truthful information online. We saw that 3% of our posts engaged in this kind of proactive information sharing. About 2% of the posts shared kind of truthful information about kind of events or issues related to their policy platforms. We saw a lot of sharing of polling results, often those that were favorable to the candidates or party lists that were posting them. And we also saw just kind of general public service announcement type of posts. We also saw a good number of posts that were sharing voter and civic education content. That was information about when, where, and how to vote. We also saw kind of a number of posts that were discussing how to register to vote for overseas Filipino workers. And then kind of lastly, we saw a number of posts that debunked false claims that were out there. And kind of in that category, we saw a number of candidates warned kind of their following about different AI-generated videos or photos or recordings of them that were circulating to say, this was not me, I did not say this. And we saw kind of a number of different posts kind of debunking claims that their party lists had been disqualified from participating in the election. So if we continue on. On the left, we see one of these kind of information sharing posts about, a topic related to this party list's platform. And on the right, we see a voter education post discussing different deadlines for online voting registration. We can continue on. And then this is a post, an example of debunking that we saw online. This party list came out and addressed rumors that this party list had been engaging in vote buying. They discouraged vote buying and said that they do not endorse this behavior and have not been engaging. So moving on to undemocratic content. In comparison to that 71% of democratic content that we collected in our corpus, only about 2% of our coded posts contained any type of undemocratic content. We saw that around 1% of our posts engaged in speech that was targeted at different candidates and specifically trying to undermine their character or candidacy, similarly undermining party lists and their qualifications. We saw about 0.7% of our coded posts, so less than 1% of our posts contained information about election irregularities. These mostly reflected genuine voter concerns, such as concerns about overvoting and concerns about a last-minute software update to the automatic counting machines. And then we also saw less than 1% of our posts contained or were flagged as potential mis or disinformation. Fact-checking was not a part of the scope of this mission, but we kind of were able to collect less than 1% of posts that contained information that we suspected to be false. I'll also flag that this is really notable. We saw no evidence of hate speech or calls to anti-democratic behavior in our coded corpus. So no calls to political violence and no calls to voter intimidation. So that really positively reflects on the corpus of candidate and party list posts that we collected. We see here we have an example of a post that is red tagging a particular candidate. If we continue on, we see here a post kind of addressing a concern about overvoting. And finally, the scope of this monitoring initiative was really to conduct parallel monitoring to assess candidate and party list compliance with Common Elect Resolution 11064. So we created with ANFREL a number of different coding items, and we assessed different posts to see if they were complying with the resolution. We saw that a very small percentage, 16 posts in our 6,400 coded posts were flagged as potentially violating those Common Elect regulations. We saw a few that were spreading unverified or manipulated information that could undermine public trust in the election. And we also saw posts that were spreading false or alarming reports about election integrity. Notably, we'll flag that we saw no false claims of election delays, and we also saw no evidence of coordinated inauthentic behavior, as Dan mentioned, through anything like bots or troll farms. And so the overall lack of violations of this resolution, we can kind of interpret it in 3 different ways. The first way, we can say that this Common Elect resolution was effective in discouraging candidates and party lists from publishing this type of harmful content. The second potential interpretation is that candidates and party lists were not likely in the first place to be publishing this type of harmful content. And in reality, it's more so kind of unofficial campaign platforms that are more likely to be posting this content at higher rates. Those are pages like supporter pages, shadow pages, social media influencers, media outlets and journalists. These are, people that we classify as elite actors who have the potential to influence the kind of digital campaign space, but they are not kind of covered by this Common Elect resolution. And then the third potential interpretation is that this harmful content is not taking place in these kind of public social media accounts on public platforms, and that content is more so moving towards closed, private, or encrypted spaces to avoid kind of oversight and scrutiny. And then we'll continue on. I'll pass it back to Dan for some recommendations.
Thank you. So as Olivia pointed to, one avenue for improvement is to look at the unaffiliated or the unofficial campaign content. Of course, this is a much bigger ask and will require Common Elect to develop their own social media monitoring unit, to work with civil society and different organizations doing this work, to do social media network analyses, and to kind of create an identifiable ecosystem to understand where this information may or may not be coming from. Next would be to increase, as we were just talking throughout the ANFREL presentation, there was an increase in transparency in this process, but to further increase that transparency, especially when it comes to removing content that is in violation of the resolution or in general is a concern to community guidelines for social media platforms. You then need to be as clear and as transparent as possible with regular reporting so that you eliminate the risk of this perception of censorship. So continuing to publish public reports as constantly as possible is great. Next, we discussed AI very briefly. It was limited in our experience with this corpus, but generally AI is going to become more sophisticated as time increases, especially over the coming cycles throughout this year, but in the coming cycles years down the line. So generating a sense of recommendations on how to operationalize AI disclosure, both through guidance from the EMB, but also through samples of how this information should be disclosed, would benefit the public and therefore the election community. And then next, kind of continuing as Common Elect is doing to work with multiple stakeholders in this arena. of both election observation groups, fact-checking networks, civil society of all different stripes, social media platforms, media houses, because I think we may appreciate eliminating the risk of dis and misinformation in elections is a challenge. It requires you to both increase the quality of good, trusted information through fact-checking and working with media houses, decreasing the dubious and potentially mis or disinformation on social media through working with platforms, but also still civil society. But then ultimately, which brings us to our point at the bottom, is increasing the citizens' ability to determine between good and dubious information. And that can be done through media literacy, working with platforms, the EMB, or civil society writ large. But this is where we'd like to wrap it for now. If you have any more questions or you would like to look further for our recommendations, they are in the great publication of ANFREL's, and it is a little more thorough than what we have time to discuss here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Briza, Rana, Dan, and Olivia for the presentation. I don't know why we have slides on the... Are you still going to say something? No? Okay. We will have an open forum for questions after the next panel. So thank you again. We will call on the next panel. No? Yes. So again, ANFREL's final election observation report on the 2025 national and local elections in the Philippines is available via ANFREL's website at anfrel.org. You heard from Olivia and Dan. This is a shameless plug. Now, we will have a live podcast at 2 p.m. later talking about the social media monitoring during the 2025 Philippine elections. We stream it live via ANFREL's Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube accounts. The episodes also stream via ANFREL via Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So again, thank you, Olivia, Briza, and Rana. Moving forward, we invited electoral stakeholders in a reaction panel to share their reflections on particular areas of the Philippine 2025 Philippine elections and respond to key findings and recommendations of ANFREL. Each speaker is given 8 to 10 minutes to share their reflection. Let me just call on all the invited panelists first, and then hopefully they go on the stage while they arrange the seats. No, we invited firstly COMELEC Commissioner Nelson J. Celis. We also invited ACT Teachers Party List Representative Antonio Tino, National Democratic Institute Country Representative Ms. May Gladys Butoy, and of course we also invited colleagues ANFREL colleagues in the Philippines, Mr. Jode Liao, the Executive Director of the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, or PPCRV, Attorney Ona Caritos, the Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or LENTE, and Mr. Lito Averia, the National Chairperson of the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections. Sir and ma'am, can we invite you to the stage? Please take a seat. Thank you very much. So to reflect on election administration, legal reforms, accessibility, and campaign finance, I would like to give the floor to COMELEC Commissioner Nelson J. Celis. Good morning, sir.
To all, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Kay Miss Cora Ignacio, kay Madam Lisa Rosales, ANFREL officers and staff, the Carter Center, who just presented, Miss Olivia and Mr. Dan. Of course, my co-panelists, my staff who are attending right now. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Good morning. On behalf of the Commission on Elections, we extend sincere appreciation to ANFREL and the Carter Center for your social media monitoring initiative during the 2025 national and local elections. We welcome ANFREL's findings that official campaign accounts were not major sources of misinformation and disinformation. This affirms the effectiveness of COMELEC Resolution number 11064 as amended. We hope and we note the observation that the digital campaign environment remained civil and democratic, free from hate speech and incitement to violence. ANFREL's findings that candidates used social media to inform and connect with voters aligns with our goal to mainstream responsible digital electronic campaigning. Resolution 11064, as amended, was a policy that was formulated using consultative and participatory process founded on legal research and legal frameworks in different jurisdictions and bounded by the limitations of our own election laws with conscious intentions to always uphold constitutional freedoms such as freedom of speech and of expression, and with the commitment of our technology partners, Meta, TikTok, Google, and the rest of the technology partners to implement the same. Over 20,000 candidates registered around 80,000 online campaign platforms. The disclosure rules on artificial intelligence, deepfakes, and chiefakes were largely observed. Our task force, KKK, Katotohanan, Katapatan, Katarungan sa Halalan, along with our partners, removed 1,000 plus post violating COMELEC Resolution 1164 as amended. We monitored 10,000 troll coordinated inauthentic behavior accounts, conducted 69 content moderation reviews, created and disseminated 80 plus debunking materials. This was true in response to the limitations in monitoring unofficial pages. The task force KKK sa Halalan established this threat monitoring center with the partnership with DICT, or the Department of Information and Communications Technology, the CICC, the NICA, PNP, civil society, and tech platforms. We monitored 1,022 incidents, which were referred to tech platforms or relevant committees, task force, authorities if necessary. The Threat Monitoring Center was housed at the CICC's office in Quezon City. So out of this 1,022 incidents, 74.95% was all about misinformation and disinformation. 9% was coordinated inauthentic behavior trolls. And this was identified by our volunteers and partners in our threat monitoring center. 1.76% was all about the AI non-disclosure. On ANFREL's key recommendations, multi-stakeholder forum, regarding the Commission applied a participatory, comprehensive, and whole-of-nation approach. The proposal to form a partnership with other election management bodies is already being explored by the Commission with other EMBs who have requested for the COMELEC Task Force KKK technical assistance in helping them address this pressing concern on election-related disinformation and misinformation in social media. The Task Force KKK partnership and information dissemination with tech platforms provided an opportunity to share about the features of Meta on campaign ads. Excuse me, campaign ads spending and TikTok's policy against paid political ads. Further, policy measures are being studied with relevant COMELEC offices like PFAD. On content moderation transparency, we continue global engagement with Meta, Google, TikTok, and others to improve enforcement coordination and our own policy in content monitoring and moderation. On digital literacy, through the Education and Information Department, who headed the Task Force KKK, COMELEC held 143 demonstration of automated counting machines. We conducted at least 431 interviews. We issued 30 plus voter alerts. We produced numerous public-facing materials to combat misinformation and disinformation. In closing, we thank ANFREL and the Carter Center regarding your work that helped us to strengthen electoral integrity and digital resilience. We commit to enhance our policy, especially the voluntary registration of non-candidates, to encourage transparency and accountability among voters, supporters of candidates. We look forward to continued collaboration with stakeholder, experts, and partners in enhancing our policy and its implementation. Our work at the Task Force KKK Sahala will always be grounded in truth, fairness, and protecting our democratic freedoms. And regarding mole voting that was cited earlier, additionally, we at the Commission are pleased that ANFREL recognized mole voting as a strategic and inclusive initiative, especially benefiting senior citizens, persons with disabilities, and urban voters. The program expanded from the pilot implementation of 11 moles from SM and Robinsons during the BSKE 2023 to 42 moles in 2025, demonstrating both growing public demand and institutional confidence in this innovation in the Philippine elections. Voter reach and participation significantly increased from 18,576 to 94,027 assigned voters, 11,767 to 74,643 actual voters. And the turnout rate was from 63.35% to 79.38%. These results confirm that mole voting is not only feasible but highly effective in promoting inclusive participatory democracy. Malls have been proven to be safe, accessible, and comfortable venues, encouraging more voters to participate. The increase in turnout reflects growing public trust in the Commission and its innovative voter services. We acknowledge ANFREL's note on logistical challenges like the crowd control, ballot secrecy, security, and commit to referring protocols based on post-election reviews and feedback. On the call to intensify public information campaigns, we agree. We will strengthen our voter education efforts through local election officers and mall partners. We also support ANFREL's recommendation to institutionalize mall voting through formal legislation. COMELEC is committed to working with Congress and stakeholders toward this goal. In fact, legislation should not only cover malls, but other possible alternative voting centers. In fact, for the BARM elections, we are trying to have universities or state colleges and universities, and even other government edifices to be voting centers, possibly in BARM. And we're still discussing this. With regard to the Register Anywhere program, or RAP, the Commission is committed to the continued implementation of Register Anywhere program as a forward-looking and inclusive initiative that addresses long-standing barriers to voter registration. It has provided a significant contribution in expanding access to voter registration, particularly for internal migrants and metropolitan-based workers who often face difficulty registering in their home localities. The Commission acknowledges the observation on the need for storage, or rather stronger coordination between field offices and central databases. It affirms that efforts are underway to streamline inter-office processes and enhances database synchronization to ensure excuse me, both efficiency, access control, and data integrity. We take positive note on ANFREL's call to institutionalize RAP as part of the Commission's long-term voter registration strategies. We share this vision and recognizes the importance of making RAP a permanent feature of our electoral system. On the concern regarding safeguards and transparency, the Commission assures stakeholders that we are committed to strengthening verification protocols, audit mechanisms, and public information access to prevent irregularities and uphold the credibility of the registration process. Finally, the Commission wishes to share that it is already planning or on an enhanced RAP initiative, building on lessons from the 2025 national and local elections implementation. Stakeholders are encouraged to await upcoming announcement on these developments as we continue our work to ensure a more accessible, secure, and inclusive registration process for all Filipinos. For Vulnerable Sector Office, ANFREL recognized efforts led by COMELEC Vulnerable Sectors Office to improve accessibility and inclusion for priority programs, including persons with disabilities, senior citizens, pregnant women, indigenous peoples, and persons deprived of liberty. On early voting hours, we introduced this to accommodate vulnerable voters, which ANFREL viewed as a possible or a positive step toward inclusive electoral participation. Around 4.4 million voters availed of the early voting hours from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. Special procedures such as priority and satellite polling places and mall voting were highlighted as positive practices. Accessibility features in voting machines and layouts were observed, but implementation varied across precincts with gaps in remote and indigenous areas. ANFREL encouraged stronger monitoring and standardization of inclusive practices to ensure uniform application nationwide. On addressing abuse of state resources, ANFREL observed widespread abuse of state resources and vote buying during the 2025 NLE. In 40% of areas, government vehicles or buildings were used for campaigning. In 69% of areas, voters reported vote buying involving cash or goods. COMELEC's Committee on Contrabigay was commended for expanding its mandate to include ASR and for issuing clear prohibitions through Resolution number 1110-4. Despite this, ANFREL noted limitations in enforcement, especially outside the official campaign period. It urged legal reforms to expand COMELEC authority and improve coordination in addressing ASR. On Project Suri or siyasatin, unawain, resolbahin at ipanagot. The recent launch of Project Suri by FIFAD under UNDP COMELEC partnership will also support this effort by enhancing transparency, ensuring accountability, and enabling digital solutions for campaign finance reporting. The Commission is committed to actively exploring appropriate policy actions in this regard. On omnibus implementing rules and regulations of the amended RA 9369. As part of our long-term reforms, we also wish to share that an initial draft of the omnibus implementing rules and regulations of the amended RA 9369 has been prepared by the drafting committee created under the office or under my office. Excuse me. With valuable inputs from various stakeholders. So this draft will be further enhanced after the conduct of the BARM parliamentary elections, incorporating the lessons and best practices from the 2025 national and local elections and the BARM parliamentary elections. Matters beyond the scope of the Omnibus IRR shall be submitted to the Commission and Bank for study and possible endorsement to Congress. Maraming salamat po and thank you very much. ANFREL, mabuhay kayo.
Dennis, for acknowledging the recommendations and observation of ANFREL. We will run a tight ship here, so yes. Next to reflect on legislative reform, political dynasties, and campaign finance regulation is our Teachers Party List Representative, Antonio Tino. Sir?
Thank you. First of all, we thank ANFREL for this thorough study and report on the recent 2025 national and local elections. We recognize your efforts. It was shared earlier that the International Observer Mission was here for 3 weeks. So thank you for your efforts in coming up with this report to document the persistent issues that plague the electoral process in the Philippines. The ANFREL report provides a comprehensive assessment highlighting such issues as widespread vote buying, the abuse of state resources, and the continued control of political dynasties, reinforcing the urgent need for structural reforms to strengthen the electoral process in the Philippines. One side note on the findings regarding social media monitoring, particularly the finding that generally there was no hate speech and that the discourse during the elections was largely civil in tone. Unfortunately, this does not quite reflect the experience of progressive candidates, parties, and grassroots organizations that ran under the Makabayan Coalition. of which our party is a part, which fielded a nearly full senatorial slate and 4 party lists and a number of local candidates. The experience of these groups was of extensive red tagging, meaning to say that the Makabayan parties and candidates were routinely tagged as communist terrorist parties. There was also widespread vilification of the Makabayan candidates, particularly, a slide was shown earlier of the candidate Franz Castro, teacher Franz, a favorite target of the supporters of particularly of Duterte, no? And certainly these involved incitement to violence, harassment of campaigners on the ground, and these actions have long been linked to the government's National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, NTFL-CAC. I emphasize this to note that this is a persistent and evolving phenomenon that started from the time the progressive parties first participated in elections in 2001. So, end of side note. Now, going back to the report, we note the alignment of some of the key recommendations of the report with the electoral reform agenda that the Makabayan Bloc has consistently pursued in Congress. I will focus on 3 critical areas. 1, political dynasties. 2, the party list system. And 3, the automated election system, or AES. First, regarding the political dynasty legislation. The report rightly highlights how dynastic politics undermines electoral competitiveness. The persistence of political clans, documented in 73% of congressional districts, perpetuates elite control, stifles accountability, and excludes marginalized voices. So, for this Congress, we filed House Bill number 209, the Anti-Political Dynasty Act, that seeks to enforce the constitutional ban on political dynasties by first defining political dynasties, then prohibiting relatives within the 4th degree of consanguinity or affinity from succeeding to office or holding office simultaneously. This also empowers COMELEC to investigate and disqualify dynastic candidates and requires sworn statements from candidates to prevent circumvention of the prohibition. Despite broad public support, the bill faces resistance from entrenched dynasties in Congress. That has been the case since practically the eighth Congress. The furthest that such proposals have gone were in 2014, when a committee report reached plenary, and then in 2018 again, when this time in the Senate, the first time was in the House, and then in 2018 a committee report was approved in the Senate. No, that is the furthest that such proposals have gone. Despite broad public support, the bill faces resistance from entrenched dynasties in Congress. The report's call for enabling legislation aligns with our push for mass campaigns to pressure lawmakers to act on this constitutional mandate. Number 2, regarding the reform of the party list system. The party list system, meant to empower marginalized sectors, has been hijacked by elite interests, as noted in the report. We will soon file or refile our bill previously filed by Makabayan that seeks to restore the original intent of the party list system. No, there will be strict eligibility checks via public hearings to weed out fake sectoral groups. There will be disqualifying of nominees tied to political dynasties or high-income brackets. And 3, this bill will institute recall mechanisms to hold party list representatives accountable. The report's recommendation to exclude traditional politicians from the party list system is crucial. The Supreme Court's Atong Paglaom ruling of 2013 opened loopholes for dynasties and business people, big business people, to dominate the system. Legislative reform must reverse this distortion. And 3, although this was not really addressed in detail in the report, this is a particular advocacy of our parties under the Makabayan Coalition, addressing the flaws in the automated election system. We wish to address the election system itself. While we recognize efforts to make elections more efficient, the current automated election system is plagued by serious problems of transparency and accountability. In the recent election, issues related to AES included the last-minute change in the firmware version used in the machines, problems related to the transmission of election results to media that tended to undermine public confidence in the results, and the large number of overvotes. For example, for party lists, where over 3 million overvotes were reported, which raises concerns about possible disenfranchisement of the votes. So the Makabayan bloc, our parties, have a hybrid election proposal that addresses these flaws by retaining manual voting and counting at precinct levels to ensure transparency and limiting automation to canvassing to speed up results while preserving auditability. This balances efficiency with public trust, a principle absent in the current AES. So to conclude, the ANFREL report validates the need for structural, not just procedural reforms. So passing the Anti-Political Dynasty Act and amending the party list law are essential in this, particularly to dismantle elite dominance. Meanwhile, electoral credibility demands revisiting the AES through a hybrid system that prioritizes transparency over automation speed. The struggle continues in Congress, but with sustained public pressure, we hope that these reforms can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before we move to our next panelist, we would like to first acknowledge the presence and support of Ms. Sarah Asis, Head of the Social Media Division of the Education and Information Department at COMELEC, Attorney Al Kadam Sakandal, and Attorney Ann Lucille Grace Laura from the Office of Commissioner Aimee P. Ferolino, Attorney Bonifacio Chavez, Office of Chairman George Erwin Garcia, and Attorney Mazna Luchavez from the legal head of the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis, and Mr. Kevin Joshua Absalon, also from the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis, and Sheena Ibanez, also from the Office of Commissioner Nelson J. Celis. It's written here as a... Okay. Thank you. Next is to reflect on observations on electoral integrity and international standards is National Democratic Institute Country Representative, I'm sorry about that, Ms. May Gladys Butoy.
Thank you, John, for not messing up my name. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, ANFREL, for inviting NDI. Also, I would like to greet everyone online, especially those in the north. Agandad kayo dito amin, tanapig sa Tibagyo. So, international election observation is a cornerstone of democratic accountability and is indispensable in providing impartial analysis, fostering public confidence, and offering constructive recommendations that support a country's democratic elections. International election observation are based on standards, are implemented based on standards, including, for example, respect for a country's laws and regulations. And so, because these are based on standards, methodologies, methodologies are methodologies and standards are based on principles, and the results can be verified, and you can go back to the methodology, right, to defend your findings. So that's the importance of I was asked to make some remarks on the importance of principles of international monitoring. So I think maybe the reason why they asked me to do this is because NDI has a really long history of engagement in the Philippines that started in election monitoring. And this started in partnership with ANFREL. So hindi pa kami pinapanganak ni Sir Lito noong 1986. Oo, kaya kwento lang to. To translate it to our American friends, we were not born when that happened. So it's all stories for us and reports that we're basing this on. I'm joking, I was born earlier than 1986. And then, since then, ito na. Since then, NDI's work has focused on ensuring, sorry, puro kasi kayo pataw eh. NDI's work has focused on ensuring citizen participation and strengthening democratic institutions. So we've been working in the BARM, for example, on ensuring that women and youth and indigenous peoples are able to participate politically. We've also been working with local partners on the issue of abuse of state resources, campaign finance, and political participation of women more broadly. Let me just go to my comments on ANFREL's report. ANFREL's report highlights ASR and vote buying as two of the most consequential barriers to free and fair elections in the Philippines. Their ASR and vote buying is not just about transactional politics. They really skew the electoral playing field. They further entrench patronage politics as if we need them to entrench it further, but they really do. And erode public trust in the elections, public trust in the democratic institutions. ANFREL's findings on the use of government resources for campaigning and how rampant vote buying still is not surprising, right? But it should be a stark reminder for all of us that the scale of the problem is becoming bigger. From NDI's perspective, combating ASR is consequential to safeguarding our democratic institutions from corruption and to ensuring good governance. In the past, the framework for looking at abuse of state resources has always been through the lens of elections. But based on NDI's work in the Philippines with our local partners and COMELEC, we have seen that ASR does not end with the election period. ASR never ends. As soon as these politicians come into power, they use government resources to entrench themselves and also to already prepare for the next cycle of elections. And so we need to work together. We need to strengthen our partnerships, and it's important that I think the international observers also focus on this issue to highlight it some more. And this is, I think, one contribution that this report brings, because you focused on ASR and vote buying. Another aspect that I want to comment on, based on our work, is the issue that women, LGBTQI+, and other vulnerable sectors face. I think, if I may say so, I think the report does not focus on these issues, especially women. We think that it's very important. Our work in the NDI's work in the Philippines. So, for example, in 2022, we actually did an online monitoring of violence against women in politics, and we saw that women candidates, whether they're the incumbent or or in the opposition, all of them are subjected to online violence against women. And so I think this is an opportunity also for ANFREL to think about maybe, and also for Carter Center when you're thinking about the work that on social media monitoring, and even with COMELEC. I think especially that we're focusing on safe spaces. I think it's an issue that needs more attention. And then, siguro I don't have to repeat the indispensable role of civil society. We have here ANFREL's members, PPCRV, Lente, and NAMFREL, and I know how important they are to the work and to the preparations also that went into this observation mission. So, palakpakan naman natin sila. At NDI, we've always believed in supporting civil society to ensure that the work for democracy and democratic reforms move forward. So I just want to maybe focus on the recommendations that we also want to emphasize, the recommendations made by ANFREL. I think on the strengthening of the legal framework, we have seen and heard so many times why this is important, right? But I think we also have to, aside from recognizing that our current legal framework is full of loopholes that have been, especially in the campaign finance, diba, that have been leveraged by a lot of political actors. The legal framework acts also as barrier to a lot of innovation for the elections, right? It prevents the COMELEC and other election stakeholders from innovating. So I know, like, for the vulnerable sector work, we've had to circumvent the law in order to make the process accessible, for example. And so there is really an urgent need. I'm looking at Congressman Tino. There really is an urgent need to reform the legal framework. And then, maybe on the institutional capacity, let's continue supporting the COMELEC and other democratic institutions and supporting each other. And then lastly, strengthening inclusion. I think I mentioned this, more focus on women, LGBTQI as a sector. And then also, we've had very meaningful progress in vulnerable sector issues. So just to give you a bit of a history, those who are interested in the history of mall voting, that idea actually started in 2011. So it started out as an innovation on voter registration in the mall. The reason why it happened in SM because SM had a very strong advocacy on persons with disability at the time. So it was easy to convince them. And then the rest is history. So that's where it started. It was actually a mall registration initiative that started that. And then later on it was carried over, and now we're very happy that it's being used as like institutionalized as a methodology. Anyway, looking ahead, we think that the upcoming BARM elections and the barangay and SK elections are very good venues to already implement some of the lessons that we've learned from the recent May 2025 elections. NDI is committed to support local civil society and the democratic institutions, as well as partner with our friends from ANFREL and the Carter Center moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grace. Yes, just in time. But I would just like to also note what you said about representation of women and members of the LGBT community. Of course, that's very important. And yes, let's go. Uh, we also invited representatives from ANFREL member organizations in the Philippines whose work during the elections was nothing short of exceptional. They were tasked to reflect on the perspective of civil society on electoral processes and citizen participation. First up is Mr. Jude Liao, the Executive Director of PPCRV.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to ANFREL for the invitation and, of course, for the very comprehensive report, as already mentioned a while ago. Allow me to provide some reflection, specifically looking at the report from the lens of PPCRV and the mandate that we've been given with regards to the election. So the first is on voter education and registration. We note that the recommendation and reports on the need to improve communication and awareness, as well as voter education, is very much needed. A note on expanding voter education beyond ACM demonstration, although it was noted a lot of times, has been noted a lot of times in various reports, and even by Commissioner Celis a while ago, that the COMELEC was able to do a lot of ACM demonstrations. Perhaps it's important to also include other voter education efforts. In particular, as mentioned in the report, to get to know candidates more, positions, as well as public awareness on ASR and vote buying. On a side note regarding vote buying and ASR, as mentioned by Ms. May, it is still very rampant. And for us at PPCRV, and for me personally, it's quite shameful to see these things being reported by international observers election year, every election year. And aside from it being a stark reminder, perhaps it's a call for all of us to see what more we can do and to be ashamed of ourselves a little bit, just for a little bit, and see how things will change, not just on the political side, politician side, but also on the recipient side as well. And on a last note on voter education, a recent push from Hiraya and SLB on candidate education, specifically on youth empowerment towards Sangguniang Kabataan elections, is perhaps another way that we can push more competition in terms of elections, starting them young in the SK. The next is on our mandate on poll watching. The uneven implementation of rules, guidelines, and the GI is very much felt and seen by our volunteers on the ground. The pre-transmission election returns. In fact, we have noted that we have a total of 10,000 duplicate election returns from all over the Philippines. And we also noted a number of voting centers wherein all pre-transmission election returns were given to us at PPCRV. So we wonder what the other groups who were supposed to get the pre-transmission election returns will do for those. So all 9 went to PPCRV. Aside from the training, we also note the importance of conducting audits and evaluations that to be done by the Commission with the stakeholders and perhaps even with the Electoral Board members. Because we think what happens is after the elections, we do sit down as stakeholders with COMELEC, but the Electoral Board members, after they do their work on election day, the next time they revisit these things would be the next election cycle. And by that time, it would be a little bit too late, maybe even with new guidelines being presented, and then again, another set of uneven implementation will happen. So it's important for them to also know what went well and what went wrong in their own implementation from the previous elections. The third is on the, although not necessarily part of our mandate, on the monitoring of social media accounts. We thank the Carter Center and ANFREL for doing this novel study and reporting on social media accounts in the Philippines. And we do agree with the importance of also including the mapping and monitoring of affiliate and supporter pages. Because as mentioned, most of the speech and most of the disinformation comes from these other pages as well. And we at PPCRV would also be on the receiving end of some of these posts. And lastly, I would like to highlight and thank ANFREL for the presentation of the recommendations at the end, specifically with segregating them with short-term and long-term, because the short-term recommendations provide PPCRV, NAMFREL, and NENTE with a somewhat of a playbook as to how we can play hard in this off-season, as we say, in the lead up to the BARM parliamentary elections, the BSKE, and most importantly, the 2028 national and local elections. So thank you very much, and I pass on the mic to the next.
Thank you, Mr. Jude.
Sorry, to John.
I agree with your short reflection that we need to reflect and learn and do better. Yes. For the next one is, now I lost my train of thought now. Next is Attorney Ona Caritas, the Executive Director of Legal Network for Truthful Elections. Ona?
Ito time ko nga sarili ko. Ito timer ko sa sarili ko. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. First of all, I would like to congratulate ANFREL for a refreshing report. Yeah, you might be wondering why I use refreshing to describe this report. I would not claim to be the most knowledgeable when it comes to election work and reports, but I have been in the space, because I recognize, I have been in the space for a long time that I become a type person when I read international election observation reports. Ask me why. Why I become a type person? Because I would say at the end of each report, same. I read the report last night and I was surprised that it looked and it sounded different from the usual IEOM reports, International Election Observation Mission reports. Aside from congratulations, let me extend lentes gratitude to all the hardworking team of ANFREL for this mission. Finally, a report about Philippine elections that we can reference to support our recommendations moving forward. We were instructed to share our insights on several aspects of the election, but let me share Lentes' insights as to pursuing electoral reform before our parliament or our election management body. Pursuing electoral reform is like pursuing love. Why? Because it's complicated. Why is it complicated? Brisa will get angry at me again. Let me zero in. Let me zero in on the primary problem identified by ANFREL in this report: low competition. The common sense solution to this is the passage of an anti-dynasty law. But let me ask our Filipino audience, online or offline, will this pass? Not. It's hard. Long shot. So how do we go about this? By pursuing other non-controversial reforms that will create an enabling environment for a level playing field. For example, amendment of Section 55 of the Omnibus Election Code. I'm really happy that ANFREL zeroed in on that simple amendment of our Omnibus Election Code. And I'm also really happy that continues here. Let me just share a quick story about the passage of the last substantive election law in our country. It's the passage of ESRA, or the Election Service Reform Act, 9 years ago. And that was led by Kong Tino Act in that Congress. So that was the last substantive law passed in our country. And ESRA was just like the story of the amendment of Section 55 of the Omnibus Election Code. ESRA was perennially filed in Congress since 2004. But it managed to see the light of day 2016, April 2016. So how many years? I'm a lawyer, so I'm not really that good. 12 years. So it took 12 years for the passage of that simple law, allowing our public school teachers to choose whether or not to serve in the elections. And just like the story of ESRA, we also want Section 55, or the Comelec Integrity Bill, to hopefully have the same story with the Kong Tino at the helm again of ACT in this Congress. We hope that you are our lucky charm, Kong Tino, that in this 20th Congress, we've been pushing for the Comelec Integrity Bill since 2019. So it has been languishing in Congress for 6 years already. So we hope that in this Congress, we see the light of day of the COMELEC Integrity Bill. It's a simple amendment. You allow COMELEC to own its own field spaces, and you prohibit LGU casuals from being deployed in these field spaces. And we saw, particularly in the last elections, that in some cities, these casuals coming from the local government units are actually interfering in the registration of voters in their localities. So it has a direct effect on the competition. So if we amend that simple provision in the Omnibus Election Code, that would impact, or that would hopefully answer the low competition problem identified by ANFREL. Another reform that we could go about to address low competition in the country is, of course, we saw in the last election how congested our voting centers are, or were. And we saw how mall voting helped in decongesting our voting centers. And if a voting center is congested, there is that high probability that voters of certain candidates, if they don't have enough resources, or if they're not part of the incumbent, or they're not controlling the security forces, their voters would not be allowed to vote. So to remedy that situation on election day, we support the recommendation of ANFREL to institutionalize small voting, and at the same time study the qualifications in the Omnibus Election Code as to the composition, or as to the establishment of polling stations in the country. It's high time that we revisit. It's high time that we take a look at the different qualifications for an establishment or an institution to qualify as a polling station. Another indirect solution to the problem of low competition is to push for early voting. And early voting is basically allowing certain sectors in our population to vote in advance of the general voting population. And who are the sectors? The persons with disability, indigenous peoples, PDLs, or persons deprived of liberty. And we saw firsthand, our colleagues at the panel this morning, how accessibility increases the participation of voters. We saw this in Mindoro. We've been monitoring accessible voting centers, the implementation of accessible voting centers in the two Mindoros. And the story of our election officers, continue in the two Mindoros, is more and more indigenous people are running in the elections because of these accessible voting centers. Because they control the voters in their communities, because they don't have to travel for a long time, cross rivers, go down the mountains for them to vote. So voting happens at their community. And when voting happens at their community, they control the numbers. So more and more indigenous people are encouraged to run in the elections. But unfortunately, although they run, but most of them, they lose in the elections. But still, that's a good start, that they run in the elections, that they do more aside from voting in the election. So we also want that early voting happens this way. Those who are vulnerable would be able to control their members, not control, but will be able to monitor and safeguard the votes that they need to get in order to win or compete in the elections. Again, indirectly solving or indirectly addressing the number one problem in Philippine elections, which is low competition. Another amendment that we are agreeing in the report of ANFREL is for the codification of the ASR work of COMELEC. For those of you who are not familiar, the ASR work of COMELEC actually just started this election. They started out as a committee against vote buying. But civil society managed to convince COMELEC, the election management body, to also include abuse of state resources in this committee against contrabigay. This was a highlight that, just like what May mentioned, abuse of state resources is also a big problem in Philippine elections. It's not that talked about, just like vote buying. It's a bigger problem if you take a look at the effect, the sinister effect of government programs being used for the campaigning and being used to advantage just a particular sector in our population. So we also support the codification of the ASR work of the commission, because as you know, the commissioner in charge of ASR of the Committee on Contrabigay is Commissioner Maceda. His term is until 2028. If the new commissioner who will be appointed will not be that supportive of this committee against Contrabigay, then what would happen to the work of COMELEC as to vote buying and abuse of state resources? So we need to prepare for that eventuality. So we need to see codification of the ESR work of COMELEC in our election laws. Lastly, I know anti-dynasty is hard to pass in this environment that we have, but what we've been pushing for in Lente is we might not get the whole pie, but let us maybe explore having an anti-dynasty provision in the Party-List Act. Maybe that way, that's a good compromise between the political families and the progressive party-list groups in the country. Because, of course, hindi naman natin sila mako-convince, diba, to pass an anti-dynasty law. It's basically asking them to commit suicide. So maybe it's a compromise that they might want to entertain. They may want to leave the party-list system to the party list, the genuine party list groups in the country. Lastly, another way to address low competition, John, how many seconds?
10.
Lastly is online campaigning. It's hard to regulate. It's a new environment in elections, and we have an old legal framework. The law being used by COMELEC to address or to regulate online campaigning is a law passed 1997. 1997, I don't know, May, you were, how old were you? 21. So internet was not that prevalent in the country during the passage of the Fair Election Act. So COMELEC is basically using an old law to temper or monitor or regulate the space, which the law did not envision, the lawmakers did not envision that this law would be regulating or tempering in the future. So we need a law on that, on online campaigning. Lastly, I really like the identification, just like what Jude mentioned. I really like the way that the report outlined what are the short-term goals and the long-term goals, because it's really needed in pursuing electoral reform. We have a whole pie of electoral reforms that we identified and that we want to pursue, but we have to be realistic about it. Just like pursuing love. Sometimes you don't get the love of your life, but sometimes you do get lucky. So that's that. Pursuing reform is just like pursuing love. It's complicated. Thank you. Good morning. Magandang umaga po ulit sa ating lahat.
Thank you, Ona. My reaction to you is my favorite line from Orosman at Zafira. Pag-ibig, pag-ibig, pag-ibig pa rin. Love, love, love until the end. Right?
Very good, John.
Last but certainly not the least is Mr. Lito Averia, the National Chairperson of the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections, or NAFREL. Sir?
Thank you very much, John. I don't know if it's a conspiracy that everybody put me in the center and put me at the last. But, yeah, I'd like to echo what Brisa said earlier about COMELEC's being open. No? So from Citizens' Arm, interpreted as COMELEC's extension or force multiplier, we're now regarded as partners. No? So this is part of COMELEC's new leadership under Chairman Garcia of the policy of heightened transparency, engaging election monitoring and civil society organizations and other stakeholders, a more open COMELEC, willing to sit down and discuss issues for quick resolution. COMELEC has also been exploring its boundaries, you know, like, for example, launching the internet voting. That, although sadly I can comment on that a little bit later. Okay. Now for our reaction to the ANFREL report. So, the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections commends Asian Network for Free Elections for its comprehensive and insightful report on the 2025 Philippine national and local elections. The report's detailed findings resonate deeply with NAMFREL's mission to promote transparency, fair, and inclusive elections through citizen observation, voter education, and advocacy for electoral reforms. So we reflect on ANFREL's findings in the context of citizens observers' roles, voter education, civil society's reform efforts, specific recommendations aligned with our work, and post-election development, as requested, of course, by NAMFREL. Nagpuyat ako kagabi to go through the report. Yeah, and then we aligned it with our press releases on election day and the days that followed. Also with our national report, and other materials. Also with the reports by our Independent Election Monitoring Center for BARM and Sulu in the last elections. So on the role of citizens observers, I think everybody agrees that our roles are still very much important, enhancing electoral transparency and accountability. So we share ANFREL's view that civil society organizations like NAMFREL, PPCRV, and Lente, and other civil society organizations are vital in monitoring electoral processes, from pre-election preparations to post-election audits. Our deployment of volunteers across the Philippines mirrors ANFREL's observation of CSOs' extensive engagement in observing voting, counting, and canvassing. For instance, our volunteers' use of observation forms to document accessibility and compliance issues aligns with ANFREL's emphasis on systematic data collection. So we've been doing that for, we've been doing this for a long time. The very first election that was monitored by NAMFREL is 1984, Batasang Pambansa elections. So however, ANFREL's report also notes challenges such as unauthorized individuals in polling areas and inconsistent enforcement of electoral laws and even resolutions of COMELEC, which are volunteers similarly observed in regions like, or in provinces like Lanao del Sur and the two Maguindanaos. These findings reinforce the need for citizen observers to remain vigilant and for COMELEC to strengthen its coordination with CSOs to address such violations. NAMFREL's Operation QR Code, this is an update from the Operation Quick Count, right, which we launched right before the elections, enable the public to verify election returns from posted ERs outside of the polling precincts. This exemplifies how citizen-driven technology can enhance transparency, complementing ANFREL's call for robust monitoring and mechanisms. We launched the ANFREL app for capturing election return QR codes. That was one of our proposals that has been implemented for 2025. That proposal dates back to even before 2019. So the current COMELEC implemented that, and we were able to gather through the app, crowdsource through the app, about 1 million QR codes. The election returns had 5 QR codes in them. This would be equivalent if we are to divide it by 5, because one election return has 5 QR codes. If we are to divide 1 million QR codes, that goes down to about 200,000 election returns. Right? Of course, we expected duplicates because of the nature of crowdsourcing, but we were able to match about 11 to 12,000 election returns from the QR codes compared to the electronically transmitted election results or returns that we received via the COMELEC assigned servers. So we were able to match about that much, although that's just about a little more than 10% of the polling precincts. So we hope to do this again in BARM. The other one that we did was scanning the QR codes on the voter verifiable paper audit trail, although that was limited in scope. So initially, COMELEC allowed us to do it in 2 precincts per region, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and NCR. But we tried to negotiate, and we brought the number up to about 60 clustered precincts. But we were able to monitor or gather information from 48 precincts, clustered precincts nationwide, no? From Luzon, northern Luzon, southern Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and NCR. No? Out of this, we were able to 100% match on the ER count versus the VVPAT count that we did. We were able to match the counts in 18 clustered precincts. The reason for the 18 is that the 30 had missing VVPATs, so we could not fully verify, and validate the counts. Okay. The second one is, of course, on, well, we've been repeating voter education, participation, and public trust. ANFREL's emphasis on the need to enhance voter education, particularly in Bangsamoro. There's actually a study done by the Institute of Autonomy and Governance that the finding was about less than 50%, or 54% of the BARM citizens are aware of the Bangsamoro parliamentary elections. But many of them really do not understand yet the parliamentary system as opposed to the presidential system. Just going back with working with CSOs, NAMFREL also established the Independent Election Monitoring Center for BARM and Sulu for the 2025 elections. This is composed, so we worked with the Institute of Autonomy and Governance, the Notre Dame University, the Notre Dame University Broadcasting Corporation. We also worked with the climate conflict action alert. We also worked with civil society organizations for accountability and transparency, as well as with PPCRV Cotabato City. So we'll be operating also for the upcoming BARM elections. We'll be operating the Independent Election Monitoring Center there. So again, with regards to the voter education, our observation of low voter understanding in BARM corroborates an ANFREL's call for a massive voter education campaign to ensure informed participation in the upcoming October 2025 BARM parliamentary elections. We also launched, as part of our education campaign, we launched Chikahang Halalan, an online voter education program which directly addresses this need for providing accessible, expert-led discussions on voter rights and electoral processes, which resonates with ANFREL's recommendation to design voter education materials for specific audiences. Part of that Chikahan Halalan, our panelists in that Chikahan are largely young voters, first-time voters, and those who have voted in previous elections. The observation of high voter turnout, despite logistical challenges, reflects the resilience of Filipino voters. A sentiment echoed in our reports of enthusiastic participation in urban centers. However, both organizations note issues like overcrowding, cited earlier, and difficulties in finding polling precincts, which undermine public trust. NAMFREL's partnerships with various academic institutions aim to bolster voter education among youth, aligning with ANFREL's focus on engaging young voters. We believe these efforts are crucial for sustaining participation and rebuilding trust in electoral institutions. We have heard comments on the youth participation, primarily also coming from COMELEC, that it had influenced the outcome of the elections, particularly at the national level. So we're still validating that. We're trying to do research with our analytics center, which we set up together with the Asia Pacific College. On civil society's role in pushing for reform and implementation and oversight, ANFREL's report highlights civil society's pivotal role in advocating for electoral reforms. So I will not go through this. Ona and the others have actually gone through the work on election reforms. No? We're also participating in that. Several of ANFREL's recommendations directly align with ANFREL's ongoing initiatives. ANFREL's call to enhance interagency coordination and investigative capacity to combat vote buying aligns with ANFREL's urging for the activation of kontrabigay committees and BARM. No? Again, the Commission has to explore its boundaries, maybe touch on those boundaries again. The kontrabigay resolution covers presumptions, no? Although there has not been a challenge to those presumptions, right? Not yet, anyway. Yeah. So, ANFREL's recommendations to improve election day queue systems and resource allocation mirrors ANFREL's concerns about overcrowding and delays in early voting for vulnerable sectors. The reality is the classrooms that we use as polling centers or polling precincts is really very small, especially in elementary schools, no, with chairs and desks for kids, no. Right? So that's quite difficult. Okay. ANFREL's recommendations to formalize CSO roles in election monitoring aligns with ANFREL's partnership with the universities and civic groups to expand our volunteer base and enhance oversight. In this regard, we also work with the Commission to further strengthen CSO participation. And, with regards to post-election developments or the source code review and random manual audit, I'd like to point out that the local source code review is a pre-election activities. It's not a post-election one. The most recent source code review was conducted over a week, 10 days ago, in preparation for the BARM elections, because the BARM code requires that the logos of the political parties, as well as photos of the candidates, should appear in the ballot. Also, there's an option for nota or none of the above. So that had to be inserted, requiring that the election management system, as well as the voting machine software and the canvassing and consolidation system had to be updated. And then there was a trusted build also that was done on that. But we also, during the source code review, we had passed on recommendations to the Commission, because we noted that on the ballot, the instructions were still in English. We recommended that it be in the predominant vernacular in the BARM. Of course, the predominant one is Cebuano, and then there are other languages there like Tausug and Sama. With regards to the statistical model, the RMA limits the audit to audit certain positions, only reducing the potential number of shaded ovals needed to be evaluated. There were only 4 positions that actually were audited, drastically reducing the number. The standard set back in 2010 was 99.995 accuracy rate. Okay, and that means evaluating 20,000 marks. Okay, and a ballot box, given the clustering of the precincts, could have well, for the last elections, it's set at 800 to 1,000 voters. So there should be, for 20,000 marks to be met, assuming that each ballot was fully filled out, would require about 600 ballots. But reducing the number of positions to be audited, I think there were about 40 potential marks on a ballot. But reducing the number, drastically reduce the number of marks to be evaluated. So we're pushing for a review of the statistical model for the RMA. We also suggested and recommended the use of another machine. Since it's a machine that read the ballot, why not use another machine, a similar machine, configured to read the ballots? Because human appreciation of the marks is for the human to match the accuracy of the machine is impossible. You know? Especially, I think the threshold of the mark for the machine to recognize a mark as a valid mark for a vote was reduced to 15%. No? So that's small. So how will the human eye measure the 15% vote mark? Right? It's impossible. Regarding the source code review, oh, okay. I've gone through that. In conclusion, ANFREL's report reinforces NAMFREL's observation of high voter turnout, persistent vote buying, and ASR, and of course, logistical issues. Delivery, for example, of the Starlink devices became an issue because it was not in a COMELEC approved warehouse. Rather, the machines or the devices were delivered to the house of a partner of the provider. The alignment between ANFREL's recommendations and ANFREL's initiatives, such as combating vote buying, enhancing voter education, and leveraging technology, underscores the shared commitment to electoral integrity. However, both reports highlight the need for stronger COMELEC enforcement and systemic reforms. No? This was our findings also at the BARM. No? Only one province had the PEMAC, the Provincial Election Monitoring and Action Center. The other PEMACs were not activated. No? I'd like to add also a comment on the overseas voting. While there were 1.2 million registered voters overseas, only about 200,000, more than 200,000 registered. I don't know how many voted, right? We'll have to check our records. It would have been a nice option, no? But I think from our interviews with overseas Filipinos, no? There was not enough information that reached them. Many of them also still went to the embassies or consulates to vote, finding that although there were devices in the consulates, the requirement to enroll prior to voting was not met by some voters. No? Also, we find that maybe the COMELEC should have piloted the overseas voting system, no? To select number of posts before full rollout. Okay. So again, thank you very much, ANFREL, and we'll look forward to our continuing collaboration on election monitoring.
Yes, thank you very much, Sir Lito. Please do not leave the stage yet. Thank you again for your reflections. We move to the open forum part of today's event. I think Riza, Rana, and Olivia can also join on the stage. There. Okay, from their seats, but people who are already seated on the stage. Okay. Okay. Thank you again for your reflections. May we invite Riza, Rana, and Olivia again to the stage for the open forum. We now open the floor for questions. If you have questions, concerns, clarifications about the ANFREL final report on the 2025 Philippine national and local elections, please do so. The people online can also ask questions. Please, I'm not sure if they can be connected, no? So please raise your hand and our technical team would be able to see that and tell us if you want to raise questions or probably share comments as well. That would be welcomed. No? No? I have one question though. I have to. I'm just curious because one of the concerns in this election is premature campaigning and the spending in the premature campaign. Supposedly there is no premature campaigning because any campaigning done before the campaign period are not considered as campaigning. But then candidates still spend on these things. I'm just curious, would it be possible to push for at least a reporting of the spending before the election? That can be considered campaigning. I don't know if there is a provision under the law that can support that.
I don't know if I am the right person to answer, but yeah, because we need to nuance the definition of candidate under Omnibus Election Code and the definition of candidate under the revised automated election law. So what is being implemented is the revised automated election law definition of candidate, because we are using the automated election system. But the very recommendation is to revert back to the old definition that when a candidate starts to file their certificate of candidacy, they are considered candidate already. So hopefully, that's something that the Congress would address, to revert back to the old definition under the Omnibus Election Code and do not use anymore, or harmonize how it can be harmonized the definition of candidate under the revised automated election law, because that's really a problem that's being captured and actually a concern of every international election observer, questioning not only the expenses but also the capacity of the Election Commission to audit the spending of those candidates and political parties. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Just to add to that, first, thank you, John, for always having a backup question, because sometimes audiences, they take more time to like open up. And yes, of course, I think the scope and powers of COMLEC needs to be expanded. We need to understand the problem on the ground. If it's unable to cater to one particular period and that is actually affecting the sanctity of elections, so it needs to cover that period as well. So this is something which ANFREL has also recommended in its report.
Do we have questions? Yes, sir. I will give you my microphone.
Just related to that question raised, actually it was also presented by one of our resource persons that the expenditures is not really, is a big concern for candidates, because when you ask for a level playing field for a political dynasty, an incumbent candidate versus a candidate from a basic sector like farmers, workers, there's no much. They cannot spend billions or millions just to introduce themselves. And that is why, if I may suggest also, one of the pieces of the pie that should be considered as a recommendation to address in a short term or even in the long term amendments to the current election laws. For example, the expenditure limit for presidential election for a presidential candidate is 10 pesos per voter. For other position, 5 pesos, 3 pesos. And that is multiplied by 66, 70 million. So who can spend that lot of money? You can never expect a farmer candidate to spend that kind of money. Now, probably in the proposed amendments, a particular provision on the expenditures should prohibit private contributions subsidized by government all possible posts for or items for introduction of or recognition of candidates, prohibit pre-campaigning advertisements or ads in all platforms, TV, radio, multimedia, social media. But again, it's a long shot, because again, it will also cross the border on freedom of speech by any individual who wants to maximize that kind of platform. But again, in Philippine election, voters prefer, or the voters' preference are those who are already recognized. Artists, politicians, traditional families who have been in the position for the longest time. So probably one of the minor proposal or amendments that can be addressed is with regards to the expenditures.
Would you like to react to that? Yes.
Sir, pwedeng low-hanging fruit siya. Because tracking the bills being filed the last Congress, ano po siya, na-review na rin ng NEDA, yung kung magkano na yung pwede, dahil hindi na siya realistic anymore when the candidates and political parties report out their expenditures. So hindi lang siya gumalaw, I think, sa Senate po, reviewing the 19 Congress accomplishments. So pwede siyang low-hanging fruit kasi po ito rin yung to equal the level playing field. So may mga ganun na rin pong study, but yeah, we fully support to amend that kasi nagawa po yan kasing edad ko po, 34 years ago. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, it's kind of an extension to what we were discussing, like when all the CSOs and other panelists were here. In fact, I had a question when I was sitting there. I'm not sure if we can ask questions sitting here to the ones who are now eating, but but I just
To
wanted to
expose them, no?
I just wanted to dive deeper into this political dynasty thing and lesser competition and how exactly we can resolve this, because Ona pointed out that is it possible to change the law, or to bring a law to stop this, but who's going to bring the law? The one who is sitting in the Congress, right? So are they going to bring a law against themselves? And it is also something that should come from people. So I wanted to ask all the CSOs, if they know how it is perceived on the ground, because again, they had a wider network, they interacted with voters on the ground. What are the voters' perception on this? Is this a problem for them as well? Because our understanding is also that over the time period, this is something which has been normalized. This is something which the voters have also internalized. Like you added, that it's, these are the kinds of contestants or the candidates they are likely to support. So it's very difficult for somebody without any money to actually have a positive or good chance, right? So what should ideally be done here? Because it's the internalization which is the problem. It's the normal, this has been normalized, that's the problem. So how exactly this can be changed on the ground? Because the demand should come from the people. So is it something at the school level? Is it how we tell the history or we teach the history? Because if we are only going to teach them about these dynasts, then obviously this is something they are going to internalize when they are going to grow up, and they are not going to give chance to new candidates or new parties. So maybe our CSO members, if they can add more to this, that how exactly the voters can change.
Does anyone from our CSO partners want to respond? But yes, Ma'am Cora.
Yes. This is not to answer, but to add another layer of question. Are the CSOs involved in the election, specifically the election monitoring organizations like the three of us? Should we stop at ensuring the integrity of the votes? In other words, in spite of our different taglines, ours is make every vote count. That is our ultimate responsibility. Now, should we go further to advocate towards advocacy? For example, the political dynasty. We don't mention that. We just report. Or for example, the quality of the candidates. We just say there are uncontested positions. There are uncontested candidacies in the report. We say 1 out of 3 districts are uncontested. But we do not say, because there has been horse trading, there has been, political parties, agreeing or dynasties agreeing. So should we advocate beyond the integrity of the votes? For example, in Sri Lanka, Rohana, our chairman, was telling me, you should go and encourage decent people to run for the elections, because here in the Philippines, there are only very few people. I mean, I do not know how to say, but the intelligent ones would rather, or no. I'm not saying, no. What I'm saying is, there are people who choose to engage themselves in business or in civic work or to be as professionals, but they do not want to be involved in politics because they see politics as something they do not want to be engaged in. But in Sri Lanka, he was saying his his EMO is encouraging people to run for elections. That would be the equivalent of saying, hey, Mr. Pangilinan, Mr. Ramon Ang, Mr. Give me names of people who are models of, good citizens. Tumakbo naman kayo. Please run in our election because we need people like you. Because, Attorney Ona, Lito Averia, who is, Jude Liao, run. Please run. Hindi ba? I am myself a witness. I am an election monitor. Iyak ako ng iyak noong 1998. Nanalo si ERAP. So we are counting the votes. In other words, ini-ensure natin na counted ang votes, yet the votes go to candidates. I mean, ako personal ko to somebody who cannot run the country. Yet, we protected his votes. So, ang dilemma, the philosophical question is, shall we stop at counting the votes and ensuring the integrity of the votes, or being advocates of deeper changes that will impact the quality of the leadership in the country? We mentioned Bico Soto, we mentioned Benji Magalong. Have more of those. Ikaw, tumakbo ka.
Who wants to run for the next election?
John. No, actually, that's the message of the report. In a more directional perspective, CSO should engage in that kind of advocacy because it's high time. Because that's the perspective coming from the hat of international observers, because we've seen that in different countries. As apart from protecting or strengthening the democratic institutions, the real problem is the people running the country. So we have our limitations as international observers, but we are not also putting the responsibility or the burden not only to the civil society organizations, but as international observer, how can we collaborate with civil society organizations? So that's the call. But probably we can hear more coming from the civil society organization who have similar programs to be conducted. So that's something that everyone should talk about. Yeah.
And I think that coming back to the question that John asked, the campaign begins on social media as well, much before the campaign period. So maybe if you want to add anything.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that just another thing we've mentioned in our recommendations, and something I would just encourage civil society to take the lead on, is just this proactive voter education and specifically media literacy education. I think that's the best way to empower both voters and candidates who are running for office. Kind of educating them on how to respond if they are targeted with hate speech or false information narratives, and educating voters on how to identify false information that they encounter online, and how to identify AI-generated content that may not be labeled. And that's something that it's really a salient point, that the campaign period doesn't start when it officially starts. It's kind of almost constantly going. And so, I think in these critical periods of time between elections, it's just really crucial to make use of the opportunity to put together these media literacy and voter education efforts kind of before the campaign ramps up so that voters are already equipped with that information.
Thank you, Olivia. Do we have one more question? Yes, two actually. Last two questions. But Attorney Helen first, no? The woman in the white.
Hello. Hi, good morning, everyone. I guess it's really for the people sitting in the stage. Not really about reforms, but I wanted to ask, who is your dream reader? Like, more than anyone in this room and anyone in the Zoom room, like who do you think is your dream reader of your report? Because I always think that with this report, it's just us who's reading it, reflecting about it. And also, how do you think can you actually reach out to that dream reader of yours? Thank you.
Dream reader. Who wants to take the question? Rana, who is your dream
I think
reader?
let's start from here. First, I thought she was asking about dream leader. Then I would have gone with Helen.
I thought you wanted to have like an audiobook. Why are you searching for somebody else when I'm here? But yes, dream reader, please.
I think
No, for me, it's the powerful players who will decide on the reforms that will be passed in the next 3 years. Because it's a sad story looking back. For the past 9 years, there's no specific election law, substantive law that has been passed. So that's a sad story for the Philippines. And it's already 2025. 3 years after, it's another presidential election. So my dream reader would be the powerful players, political parties who will be shifting along, who will be deciding what reforms will be passed. Yeah.
Like
And I
the
think-
president, no?
Yes, because he has a huge call on that. What would be the priority as well?
Rana?
I think to also complement Briza's answer, my dream reader would be voter. You know, the benefit finally passes on to the voter. They are the ones who need to be protected, so they need to be aware about what needs to be done. Maybe the pressure or the demand should come from them. Only then the Congress will make a move. Otherwise, if there is no public demand for anything, things don't really change, either in the short run or long run. So demand should always come from we, the people, the Filipinos. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we also tried to keep the language of the report very simple so that it can reach to maximum number of people and also to the lay persons who don't really understand the complex terminologies and all, especially the recommendations part.
Yes, Olivia, who is your dream reader? Reader.
I think that I think that what you both said is really, really resonates. I think that for thinking specifically about the social media monitoring section, I would say that the goal is that could kind of reach an average social media user. That it could help equip them to, understand what they're seeing online and either, agree or disagree with the findings that we've had. I think that, again, kind of the best way to combat disinformation is through education. So I think just reaching as widely as possible is a priority for, the Carter Center and all of us.
Thank you, Olivia. Last but not the least. The least. The last and the least.
Hi everyone. So I'm Tin from the British Embassy. I just have two questions. The first one is on history and the second is on priorities. So on history, because I'm very young. No, I'm kidding. So I like how you all laugh. So on history there's been a huge discussion throughout the entire session right now to shift the lens on electoral competition or the recognition that there's low electoral competition that tries to combat or to challenge the dynasties every election. Is this a new area of reform that we're looking at, or has it been present? Has the recommendation been present ever since ever since we saw dynasties emerging? The second question is on priorities. We have a window of opportunity from now until the 2028 elections. If the electoral watchdogs and the civil societies would choose just two areas of reform that you think would be the best to try and strengthen the electoral systems come 2028, what would be those two top priority reforms?
Thank you. Who would like to take the question?
With regard to low electoral competition, I would say not new because it has been present since 2018. Looking back at the data during the elections on barangay and SK elections, we've seen that because there were a lot of uncontested oppositions or there were areas where barangay and SK officials did not run or any other persons ran for the position. So we've seen that data since 2018, and it was pretty evident under the barangay and SK elections. And we're seeing a lot of increasing uncontested positions for national and local positions. So it's not only in the barangay or SK right now, it's already in the national and local positions. And with regard to the top two, I would say the non-controversial ones. Primarily, anti-political dynasty might be a good reform, but I would go to those reforms which has high probability to be passed. So I would go to the non-controversial ones.
Which are?
COMELEC independence, and at the same time institutionalizing early voting. Yeah, thank you.
Rana?
I think Brisa has already answered this, but just to add, I think it's important to strengthen the participation bit. I and ANFREL, we also kind of observed this during this election, that there were lots of operational hurdles. So I think that is something which can be easily corrected, because there was too much on the papers in form of COMLEC resolutions, and there were so many resolutions which had been passed, and it's a very positive thing actually to have everything in written. But it's also important to make sure that it's implemented properly, it's enforced properly. So we observed that there was a significant gap in the two. Had they been able to implement everything properly, I think the problem would not have been there, especially with regard to this, the last hour or last couple of hours. It was lots of chaos in many polling stations that we observed. So I think we can always, this is a short-term recommendation and this can easily be implemented. You just need to manage things properly. You just need to train, you just need to pass on the knowledge that you have in these resolutions to the staff, the ones who are taking care of the elections. So it's just the operational part for me.
I'll just say I'll yield to you both on kind of the broader electoral landscape. But I would just say in terms of social media reforms, I think, the platforms are the people, kind of the only people who have access to, the full extent of data that is available. So I think just continuing and deepening collaboration with platforms and prioritizing, trust and safety work, I think is kind of a key priority moving forward. And then I've said this multiple times already up here, but I'll say again, education is really key. Working with civil society organizations to kind of make use of the broad networks and really make sure that education goes far and wide, I think is key, and looking forward to 2028.
Thank you, Olivia, Rana, and Brisa. Also, thank you to our panelists earlier for answering the questions for the panel discussion as well. We have come to the final part of our program. We will get through this. To share his concluding remarks, please welcome Mr. Andrew Bose, a political counselor at the British Embassy, Manila, so joining us via Zoom.
Good morning, everyone, and I hope you're all keeping safe in the bad weather that continues to hit Metro Manila. I'm sorry I'm not there with you in person, but this hybrid setup has allowed me to participate and listen to the very interesting discussions. So thank you very much for that. Before I start, I'd like to express the Embassy's immense appreciation to our partner, the Asian Network for Free Elections, for all the impressive work that they have done in a short period of time and amid quick deadlines and turnovers to deliver what is a truly reflective as well as refreshing report on the 2025 Philippine midterm elections. I should emphasize that the UK government, of course, has no intention of interfering in the Philippines electoral process. Our role, along with the wider international community and local election watchdogs, is to observe and monitor. And as a member of the diplomatic corps, observing an election allows us to learn and understand the country's politics and democratic systems. I had the chance to participate in the embassy's election observation mission on the day of elections, and we deployed teams all over the country to visit electoral precincts and monitor the voting and the quick transmission of results and the vibrancy and excitement by which Filipinos wake early for and bear long lines in heat and rain to ensure their voices are heard and their choices are valued through the ballot. So monitoring the elections was a valuable learning experience that made me all the more aware of the importance of this democratic exercise and why we need to safeguard it. As the panel has just observed, the election process is an ongoing exercise, and we all need to engage with every part of it. It's a reminder of the role of all the people who safeguard it outside the voters who have all been vigilant and involved throughout this election season. Our partners, civil society organizations and election observers stand as guardians to electoral processes here and globally. And we value ANFREL's work because it supports governments and electoral commissions to ensure that electoral mechanisms are transparent, that digitalization and automation do not hamper or disenfranchise, but instead empower the electorate, that parties and candidates have an equal playing field to stand in electoral contestation, and that women, Indigenous communities and other marginalised sectors are given representation, and that every ballot fed into the automated machine reflects a citizen's genuine choice for change, devoid of insecurity, fear, or influence from internal and external threats. So we thank COMELEC for upholding the principles of transparency and accountability and facilitating access to monitor the Philippine elections, and for remaining open to the recommendations of civil society on how elections can better be strengthened. We very much welcome your receptiveness, openness to feedback from so many from so many stakeholders, balancing it on top of the rigors of electoral preparations, and for generally taking in those recommendations into consideration and finding ways to implement policies that strengthen the country's electoral systems. Now, of course, the Philippines is about to embark on another historical electoral milestone in October, as the Bangsamoro region holds its first parliamentary elections. And the success of those elections is crucial. It signals a people's attempts to build its politics, recover from years of conflict, and transition to peaceful governance. It changes the region's narrative, where it no longer bullets that dominate, but ballots that gives the Bangsamoro people the right to choose not only their leaders, but their future. So we join with others in hoping for the success of the Bangsamoro elections. We know that COMELEC, along with those in government and civil society, is taking all the necessary preparations to ensure the success of the upcoming BARM elections. We will continue our partnership with ANFREL through the deployment of election observers to the BARM, and hopefully, as with these elections, their presence, along with many electoral watchdogs, will help protect the process and, where needed, offer crucial learning to allow institutions to work collaboratively with civil society to continue to improve the election of parliamentary leaders in the region in the coming years. So again, we thank you all for all the work you have done to ensure the conduct of genuine, free, fair and peaceful elections. UK government stands with you. All of you are partners in ensuring progressive governments and stronger democracies are upheld one ballot at a time. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew Bose, Political Counselor at the British Embassy Manila, and also thank you for expressing your continued support for ANFREL and the BARM elections. No? Next is Riza Rosales, Executive Director for ANFREL, to give her closing remarks.
Yeah, maraming salamat dyan at maraming salamat po sa lahat. I-flash ko lang po ano po yung mga moving forward activities ng ANFREL. Buti na lang po na una magsalita si Andy. So pupunta ang ANFREL sa bar. Kinamit niya at kino-confirm na po ba ito. But bahagi po ng moving forward activities and part of the long-term advocacy plan of ANFREL. Just this May, we had our MOA signing with COMELEC. for the conduct of the 7th installation of Asian Electoral Stakeholder Forum, which will be conducted in March 2026. No definite dates pa lang po, but this is a gathering, or this is an event done every 3 years. So the last time was in Nepal, last 2023. So ito po yung Pilipinas naman ang mag-host, ANFREL and COMELEC. So it's a gathering of different election management bodies across the globe, civil society organizations, the media, journalists, election experts. So what's the very objective? This is to streamline and prioritize reform agenda, and at the same time to showcase and highlight the best practices around the globe. Kung ano po yung pwedeng ma-improve with regard to our electoral system, processes, and the quality of candidates that we have in each country. Second is that, just to promote, we will still have our podcast later at 2 o'clock, right, John? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's an informal podcast talking about our social media monitoring findings. So it's an informal discussion about disinformation, misinformation, and how to protect better the information integrity. And lastly, yes, ANFREL will be going to the BARM. So it is not yet a full-scale mission because we still need to assess if there's a need, and at the same time to assess the election security if we will be deploying a full mission in the BARM. But we will be there starting by August to conduct the pre-election assessment. I think it will happen by 3rd week and 4th week of August. This is to inform the team also. So it's only in my mind right now. But it will be conducted by 3rd and 4th week of August. And just to close the launch, gusto ko lang po ulit magpasalamat. Apologies if I will be speaking in Tagalog. Maraming salamat po sa lahat ng pumunta ngayong araw kasi po sobrang hirap po ng desisyon kahapon kung itutuloy pa to o hindi. Nandun na po kami sa punto na wag na lang muna. Pero iba rin po yung naging desisyon at naging lakas ng loob para ituloy pa rin to. And looking at the feedback, the recommendations, and reactions coming from the panelists, from the COMELEC, from the Congress, maraming salamat po kasi mas lalo kami nagkaroon ng lakas ng loob at mas maayos na direction on how to conduct a mission in each country across Asia. Salamat po lalo sa Lenten ng ANFREL PPCRB kasi nandyan po kayo sa suporta na binigay nyo sa ANFREL. So, yun lang, and back to you, John. Salamat po ulit.
Thank you, Briza. We would again like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to those who participated in today's event, both in person and online. Also to those who were part of the mission, of course. From our core mission team, interpreters, drivers, coordinators, observers, and the ANFREL leadership, thank you. Maraming salamat po. ANFREL's final election observation report on the 2025 national and local elections in the Philippines is now available via ANFREL's website. Please visit anfrel.org. To get the latest news and updates about ANFREL's programs and activities, please follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok pages. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and WhatsApp channel. Where are my cameras? I have been your moderator for this morning, John Antiquera. Thank you. Stay safe. Maraming salamat, Pilipinas. Mabuhay tayong lahat. Bye.
We can also gather for, like all the panelists, we can also gather for a picture. But before we do that, let us also thank the two amazing EAs, electoral analysts, who
Thank you,
Nenes and
Nenes and
Jake,
Jake.
Khoirunisa Noor Agastiyati and Jake Barker. They are, I think, with us online right now. And thank you for your amazing work. And the panelists and everyone.
May we invite everyone to the stage for a photo-taking opportunity. I think we can end the live now. No, it's okay. Yes. Thank you again. If we are live, hi. Bye. Ako yung mag-i-end.